Hello, it's me again, and I would like to introduce two very special guests who will connect with us virtually. It's Robin Wauters from Tech.eu and Justin Alderson from Microsoft, and they will talk about sales and acquisition in Europe based on a decade of experience at Microsoft.
We gotta go, so I don't
We
know
gotta
what
go.
that means.
Okay, let's start.
Are we actually already live? So I'm guessing we are. So in case we're not, I'm sorry. So I'll do a very quick introduction of myself, and then I'll hand over to Justin, who's going to do most of the talking. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in. It's a shame that we couldn't physically be there with you at the Wolf Summit. I was actually planning to go to Warsaw, but for reasons that I no longer need to explain, that wasn't possible anymore, unfortunately. My name is Robin Wauters. I'm the founding editor of Tech.eu. So I've been a European technology journalist and analyst for about 12 years already, covering the European startup innovation ecosystems from every angle, whether it's from funding or capital or mergers and acquisitions or on the policy side. So we've been covering the European tech industry for quite a while. We usually talk to startups and investors, sometimes with corporations, but more in the context of how they work with startups. So it's actually not very usual for me to interview someone from one of the biggest tech companies ever to exist on the planet. Justin Alderson from Microsoft, it's a pleasure to have you here, and maybe give us a little bit of background, who you are, what you do, and why you're here.
Great, thanks so much, Robin. And yeah, I'd like to echo what you said to everybody out there, whether that's in the physical room in Warsaw or joining us online. Really sorry I can't be in Warsaw for this. I haven't been over to Warsaw since December. Looking forward to coming again soon. But we're very much in a new reality. So as Robin said, I'm Justin. I've been at Microsoft for 17 years. At the moment, I'm in our partner organization, and I head up our technical team within our partner organization. So I'm kind of our CTO of partners. And so my team work with organizations ranging from startups to global integrators within Central and Eastern Europe, on helping them, build solutions based on our technology portfolio and our technology stack. Before I was doing this role, I did a number of things in Microsoft. In fact, when I joined, I was in a team that worked on products and services that either were startups internally or that we'd acquired, trying to mainstream them into the Microsoft motions. So got some experience of startups and acquisitions through that. But super happy to be here today with everybody and to share some of the trends that we're seeing going on, both with startups but also across broader partners, as a result of the situation at the moment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you've been with Microsoft for quite a while already, haven't you?
Absolutely, yeah. No. So,
was it 17 years?
17 years, yeah.
Right. Well, that gives you some perspective, at least historically, so we can have a chat about that. But of course, whatever we talk about historically is going to pale in comparison with what we've seen this year, for obvious reasons, because of this global pandemic that has been affecting everything, basically, the economy, society. And I want to talk about how this has affected your work within Microsoft, but also what you've seen change within the environment that you work, your partners, your clients, and the companies that you typically meet with within Central and Eastern Europe. So maybe first things first, how has it changed the way that you work within Microsoft? How has it changed your daily routine? How has it changed the way that the company actually copes with remote work and virtual offices?
Yeah, and great question, because I think even within Microsoft, you see different teams work in different ways. But one of the things that we saw fairly early on is at very senior level in company, there was a response team set up. There was a lot of communication globally to try to look after our employees and look after our operations, ensure continuity, but also a lot of taking care of the individuals. And certainly in my role looking after Eastern Europe, a lot of what we were doing involved a lot of traveling around, but also a lot of remote work, conference calls, etc., with teams all spread across countries. So for me personally, I'd say half of my life stayed the same because I was dialed into Teams meetings, etc., the whole time, virtual working across countries. But what suddenly stopped was all the travel. Right now, I'm lucky to work for an organization that already thought that way. I know in other parts of the world where maybe in a single country, people are much more used to going into the offices, meeting people face to face. For them to move to that pure virtual mode was a lot more of a change. But even quite early on, we had messages, for example, in our HQ, over in Redmond, that unless you were in a really essential role to do things like keeping our services running, our cloud services, the guidance was for people to go and work from home. And obviously that meant we had to make quite a lot of operational adjustments. But I think now we're all getting used to this new normal. You can see today I'm in our office, right? Our office in Munich, I would say, is it's open, but it's not fully open. Most people are still working from home, but if people really do want to meet face to face, they can go online, run an app, do their health check in, book a seat, make sure they keep their distance, etc., and do that. So we're adapting to that new normal, and I think I'd say that that's what I see happening in a lot of our partners and a lot of our customers as well.
Yeah, and do you think this adaptation within Microsoft, is that going to be fairly permanent, you think, or is this just temporary?
No, look, I think it'll be fairly permanent in the sense that one of the things we saw is it kind of came into three horizons. And with a lot of the partners that me and my team have been working with, we see a very similar kind of three horizon thing as well, which is back in March, April, May, depending, which country you were in and when lockdowns really hit. The first was basically response. So it's okay, how do I keep my people safe? How do I keep my operations running? So you're very much in respond mode and people looking for very short-term practical solutions to get things done, right? So we saw a lot of, for instance, as a classic example, we have Teams as a technology. We saw a lot of education, schools, etc., suddenly who hadn't really thought about using Teams before, suddenly saying, please, we need a solution for doing remote lessons, and can we have it next week, right? Because we need to mobilize fast, right? So there's a lot of very high-speed response just to work out how do we adapt, how do we keep running, how do we keep people safe? Then I think as people got through that stage, we moved to the second stage, which is a bit more reacting to the new environment, which is saying, okay, so we've found a way of keeping our things up and running. We found a way of looking after people, running what we need to run. But how sustainable is this? So maybe we need to look at how do we optimize our costs? Maybe we need to change what we're offering. And so people started to look at how do we therefore manage ourselves on a slightly longer term scale. I think there was an admission all around that people say this is not going to be for 2 weeks, this is going to be for 6 months or 9 months, whatever. So people looking at how do we then have to adapt to sustain this for longer, right? And start to do some long-term planning rather than short-term reactive planning. And now I think the stage we're in is the one that says, probably things are not going to go back to the way they were before, right? So many people have actually said, you know what, I actually find spending more time at home is making me more productive and I see my family more. This is good. Or maybe people who expected they had to work in a physical location next to each other are saying, you know what, we work fine remotely with each other. Do we actually need an office anymore? Or can we save some cost there, right? Or in some cases, maybe they're saying, look, we had a product or a service before that was very focused on one scenario that involved people being together, right? And now we need to adapt that. So take healthcare as an example, which is top of mind. Maybe, there's a whole new set of demands around things like, telemedicine now, which has suddenly got far more adoption than it did a few months ago. So those three horizons of short-term response, making sure people are fine, mid-term, how do we manage through this, manage costs, manage operations, and then long-term, what are we going to do differently now, which is going to stick with us regardless of what happens when the pandemic goes away? And I think I see those three horizons of questions being asked pretty much regardless of organization, right? So it could be a big integrator, it could be a startup, it could be a mid-sized customer, but all kind of thinking about it in those three horizons, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, of course it does. But so relatively speaking, I think Microsoft is actually in a pretty good place during a pandemic. Because you offer productivity tools, you offer tools like Skype, you have LinkedIn as a network, cloud services, obviously, and software for different purposes. But of course, you have to take into account the big picture that a lot of your clients and partners are suffering throughout this pandemic. It's not every sector, of course, is thriving because of the pandemic. There are some hard hit sectors as well. So what are some examples within your partner ecosystem at Microsoft that you've seen that are sectors that are particularly badly hit?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd maybe look at that from the partner perspective in two things. There's the ones that are badly hit, and there's the ones who have been doing well. And I think the ones I see being hit the hardest are maybe some of the organizations where they're very fixed in terms of how they approach projects. So if I think about our partner ecosystem, if you go back to, let's say big classical system deployments, time and materials contracts, customer takes a risk to deploy something, may take, a year of consulting to go and get things running, right? And what I saw is a lot of those projects were put on hold. And so people saying, look, we don't want to invest in a big transformational project right now because it maybe takes us longer to pay it back. We can't get consultants in to do interviews with all the users, et cetera, the old-fashioned way. So big kind of time and materials projects tend to get put on hold. But at the same time, so we heard feedback from a number of, let's say, integrator partners that they said they were really struggling on billable hours type of contracts. But what was interesting is their customers then came and said, yeah, but do you know what? Can you get a remote working solution for us up and running within the next week, right? So suddenly that shift from big custom work to maybe small, highly repeatable work or managed service kind of work was a really big trend that came out. And we had a conversation with quite a lot of our partners on, hey, we see that need to shift to less customized work, to more cookie cutter repeatable work that we can roll out quickly. And actually that's better for them because they can respond to a customer super fast. But typically when it's repeatable, there's also more margin in it, right, as a partner. So you see those things happen faster. So I think that's one of the trends that I've definitely seen is that shift from customized big heavy projects to much more agile short project cycles with a quick impact for the customer. And that's really been interesting to watch.
Great. And do you also have some perspective on if the situation in Central and Eastern Europe is any different from the rest of Europe or the world for that matter? Or is there anything specific to the region that you think is interesting to note?
Yeah, so look, I've been working in Central and Eastern Europe for about 15 years, and I always think there are two very interesting trends. And this is a highly general comment, right? So I'm sure there are always exceptions to this. But on one side, it's been a highly innovative area. So we know that even if I look at the startup ecosystem, we've got an amazing set of developers. We're one of the biggest areas in the world in terms of sort of developer brain power. A lot of the biggest security companies of the world are born out from Central and Eastern Europe. So on one side, we've got this massive wave of innovators that sit in Central and Eastern Europe, and that's always been a real strength and one of the reasons I love working in this area. On the other side, we also have some quite conservative government and regulation environments, which means we've been one of the last places in terms of cloud adoption in the world. So whilst I think from the developer perspective, we've been driving cloud adoption and then typically going and selling those things across the world, from an end customer perspective, sometimes we've been very, very conservative, which is an interesting dichotomy, right? But certainly what we've seen over the last couple of months is that conservatism about the cloud, because, and I would say public sector education, especially being a role model of that, suddenly people saying, hey, we need to, get lessons to children quickly. With the adoption of, Teams and other situations like that, or solutions like that to get things moving, has actually led people to question whether that conservatism is really applicable or not. Or, hey, if we can get schools moving on digital transformation this quickly, why can't we get other parts of the organization moving that quickly? And I think that's going to really untap, and open up a market internally in Eastern Europe that we're actually well positioned to fulfill because we have the skills to deliver it here.
Yeah, for sure. And as a company, Microsoft, what do you actually do to help the partners that you work with get through this pandemic? Like what kind of services and products have you adapted to suit their needs in this time of crisis?
Yeah, no, I think exactly to that. One of the things we've done a lot of work on with my team, my colleagues' teams as well, is going in, especially for the sort of organizations who may have been working on larger projects, is saying, well, let's brainstorm on what could we do repeatably, what could we package up, how can we help reduce the sales cycles and also the deployment cycles of some of our bigger projects. I think quite often in Microsoft, we say that transformation kind of has 4 pillars to it. Right? There's how, as an organization, you work with your customers. There's how you produce your products and your services. There's how you run your own operations, and there's how you help your employees. And I think all 4 of those things have been quite impacted by the current crisis. I think the one about customers, and I'd say a lot of organizations can find this, is almost all selling and customer engagement now has moved to digital We're doing this online. I would love to be in the room, but I can't be in the room. So I think now maybe organizations who in the past would have said, hey, maybe I need to hire some like high-level salespeople to go and sell to some big customers. You now have the empowerment to sort of just make the phone call or invite people to the Zoom meeting or whatever you want to go and engage. And customers are quite open for that, right? The second thing is, I think, if you acquire customers as an organization through there, a lot of customers are saying, look, we want help to navigate the pandemic too, right? And if you can come to them and develop that trust by solving a problem now, they're likely to be a highly loyal organization to you, right? So if you can solve a problem during a crisis, that already gives you a lot of credibility for the future and to remain with that customer. So I think, for a lot of even smaller organizations, they're saying this is an opportunity for them to break into the size of customer maybe that they couldn't do before. And then I think in terms of like the product transformation, again, it's a good opportunity for people to reflect. And we hear this from startups. Often in the journey of a startup, there's often a point where you get asked that question: is this really the right product? Is this really the right market? Am I really doing this at the right time? And that can happen because suddenly, your cash flow looks bad, or it can happen because, that something changes in the market. In a sense, this disruption can be very, very helpful because it really forces you to ask some very difficult questions. And I think what I'm seeing is a number of organizations saying, do you know what? We're going to be ruthless about saying this thing we were building, we're going to stop doing because honestly, it doesn't resonate. And this thing which people can relate to now and helps them through this crisis is something which is going to help them beyond that, because maybe the situation doesn't go back to normal, it just continues in a new mode. So that's a couple of thoughts on that one.
Yeah, great. And perhaps more broadly, what are some of the trends that you think this pandemic has sort of accelerated that you think are here to stay, and which ones do you think are technology trends that are really, really just now for the pandemic, and then we'll all go back to the office and meet each other like we used to? And same for business travel, really. Is it really coming back the way it was, or isn't it?
No, look, I think we all have our personal perspective on that, and business travel being a great example. I know I miss it, but I also know my family don't miss it at all, right? And I think, when I'm, able to go travel again, maybe I won't be doing it as much as I used to. So I certainly think a couple of things are going to stay. One, I think this kind of hybrid mode of working part remote, part virtual, part face-to-face, I think that's going to be here to stay. You see some of the solutions now. I mentioned, things like in education, in healthcare as well. I think once you've realized that you can use these things efficiently, then look, face-to-face is always that highest level of interaction. But I think across workforces of all different organizations, people are now saying, do you know what? We can do things remotely. And even when we talk to our friends in the finance departments who often look at how profitable we are, they will, even if we wanted to go back to normal, they'll probably say, why would we do this? Why wouldn't we just keep saving that money? Right? What's really essential? So that for me is definitely here to stay. I think the other thing that we'll see is, as I said, we've seen that disruption, that suddenly a lot of the transformation that we were pushing and saying, maybe we can move more things, into cloud-based services where we can see more adoption of artificial intelligence. Maybe we can see more adoption of virtual environments. I think those will stay. There might be a little bit of going back, but I think fundamentally now people have tasted the benefits it can bring and the practicality it can bring, and those will definitely stay with us. So, do I see certain things rolling back to how they were before? Honestly, I think once you've seen these things, it's very difficult to go back. And I think that would be the lesson. If I reflect on the conversations we've had with partners, most people a couple of months ago were maybe still saying when things get back to normal. I don't hear the phrase about when things gets back to normal anymore. It's all about, we're going to adapt to this because this is how things are going to be from now on. There may be, we look forward to when we can meet, but we're not assuming that it's going to be as intense as it used to be. So I think a lot of these changes are here to stay.
Yeah, I concur. And I also think, in fairness, a lot of these trends were sort of already here, simmering for years, and this just sort of puts you in a global situation that you cannot escape the transformation anymore. It just goes incredibly quickly all of a sudden. Then maybe a final question for startups in particular. Do you think this crisis also opens opportunities for them? I'm going to guess that the answer is yes, but then how do you actually capitalize on those opportunities, and how can Microsoft help these companies scale within the context of the pandemic?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think, it sounds bad to say it, but I think any kind of crisis like this is always going to be a forcing function. Like I mentioned, to ask the question, is what I intend to sell or a service I intend to deliver really what's relevant, not just now, but for the future, right? And so I think having that question really forced is a very important one. And if you think about, the journey a startup goes through, quite often we're looking at what's the burn rate, what's the time to profitability, how do I look at expanding internationally, all of these things. And if you can navigate this crisis and actually reduce your cost base, that maybe time to profitability can be accelerated, right? If, for example, you were thinking you wanted to do geographical expansion before, and we've all now learned how to work in virtual teams without coming to the office, maybe if you were going to hire another person in your local market, you go, hey, I want to expand in Germany. Why don't I hire a German? Because I'm still going to meet them in the virtual office like I did before, but they can bring me that cultural relevance that maybe I didn't have in my team. So it gives you like a people diversity issue as well. So I think, that and the ability to go after customers that maybe you thought you couldn't access, but they're now open to being reached through digital means, through virtual means. Those are all opportunities, and now's the time to take advantage of those. And I think, look up on the Microsoft website, you can see the programs we have for startups. Like in general, I'd say one of the most important things is there's so much richness in the cloud platforms that we all have now, right? Is don't spend time inventing stuff that's already been built, right? If you can concentrate as an organization on really adding the value there, really adding the understanding of your industry, really adding, the novel scenario where you're unique, right? That's what's going to help you accelerate your time to success. And if you combine that with the learnings you get on profitability, on geographical expansion at the same time, then that can be a real opportunity. And I encourage people to go and look and see what we've got there that can help them get through that.
Great.
A difficult time, but a fascinating time, right?
I can only agree with you, and I think that's a wonderful note to sort of close our discussion on, because we're already out of time. But Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to explain what you do and how Microsoft is handling this pandemic. And I hope to everyone who tuned in that it was useful, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Cheers, bye.
Thanks so much, Robin. Thanks everyone
Bye.
for joining. Much appreciated.